The flashing red and blue lights of two squad cars painted my house in chaotic strokes, turning a quiet suburban Texas Tuesday morning into a spectacle. It was only 6:45 a.m., but the thick, humid October air was already beginning to cling, making my worn bathrobe stick uncomfortably to my skin. I stood barefoot on the dewy grass, a cold cup of coffee in my hand, facing a police officer with a stern expression and a mustache even more impressive than his attitude. Across the street, Carol Covington stood with her arms crossed, an undisguised smirk of triumph plastered on her face. Dressed in crisp, white tennis attire, her blonde hair sculpted into a motionless helmet, she looked like she'd just stepped off the court at the country club, not like she was gloating over her neighbor being questioned by the police. "Sir," the officer said, his voice flat, "we received a report of a hazardous and unpermitted structure obstructing public thoroughfare. It says here, you've intentionally modified a city-compliant receptacle with malicious intent." "An unpermitted structure?" I repeated, my voice dripping with disbelief. "You mean my trash can?" I gestured to the offending article. A perfectly normal-looking green plastic trash can, standing proudly at the curb, ready for pickup. Carol shouted from across the street, her voice as shrill as sudden brakes. "Tell him what's inside, Mr. Martinez. Tell him about the death trap you've constructed." The officer sighed, a deep exhalation that suggested he'd rather be dealing with an armed robbery. He glanced at me, then at the trash can, and finally at the hysterical woman. To understand how a simple trash can lead to a pre-dawn police standoff, and subsequently, the downfall of an HOA queen, we have to go back 8 weeks, to the day I moved into what I thought was a fresh start. My name is Leo Martinez, I'm 45, and I've been a master electrician for over 20 years. My life at that point was like a shorted-out circuit board. A nasty divorce had just been finalized, and I was fighting for joint custody of my two incredible kids, Sophia, 16, and Mateo, 14. I'd sunk my life savings into this corner lot house in the Oakmont Creek Estates. It was supposed to be a sanctuary, a stable place for the kids, with good schools and safe, tree-lined streets. Oakmont Creek billed itself as a suburban paradise, but after a few weeks, I realized it was more like a meticulously manicured prison. Everything was uniform. Grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches tall. Mailboxes came in 3 approved colors. Fences had to be the same style, the same shade of white. The pressure to be perfect was in the air, as thick as the Texas humidity. And the enforcer of that suffocating perfection was none other than Carol Covington, a 50-something widow who had retired from selling high-end real estate. She lived alone in the large house opposite mine. No kids, no pets, just a pearl-white Lexus GX that was larger than some studio apartments. Carol had appointed herself the neighborhood's unofficial compliance officer, a title that sounded imposing but didn't actually exist in the HOA bylaws. She was best friends with the HOA president, Richard Sterling, a man with the spine of a jellyfish, which basically made her untouchable. Carol was immaculately put together. Her blonde hair was always in a perfect updo. Her clothes were always pressed. She had a smile that could curdle iced tea and cold blue eyes that seemed capable of spotting the most minor HOA infraction from 50 yards away. The trouble started innocently enough. My corner lot meant the city ordinance required me to place my bin near the street every Tuesday morning for the garbage truck. The rule was clear. Within 3 feet of the curb, ironically, that spot was directly in the path of Carol's daily power walk, which she took at precisely 6:15 a.m. The first incident happened on a Tuesday in September. I was brewing coffee, getting the kids ready, when I heard a loud crunch, followed by the sound of shattering plastic. I rushed outside to a horrific sight. My brand new trash can was obliterated, its contents strewn across my driveway like the world's saddest confetti bomb. In the distance, Carol's white Lexus was backing up. She rolled down her window, a look of fake concern on her face. "Oh my," she said, without a trace of sincerity. "These streets are just so narrow. I hope you weren't too attached to that old thing." Old thing? I'd bought it at Home Depot the week before for $25. But I kept my cool, assuming it was a genuine accident. I spent 20 minutes cleaning up a mess of banana peels and coffee grounds while Sophia and Mateo watched, embarrassed, from the window. But then the accident happened again the next Tuesday. And the Tuesday after that, the same routine. 6:15 a.m. sharp, the rumble of her V8 engine, the sickening crunch of plastic meeting steel, and then silence as she drove away. By the third week, I was down $75 for 3 trash cans and countless hours of cleanup. My suspicion was hardening into certainty. This was no coincidence. Confirmation came from an unlikely source. Mrs. Petrova, An elderly Russian widow who lived across from me flagged me down while I was getting the mail. She had kind eyes and a beautiful rose garden. She spoke English carefully and deliberately. "Mr. Martinez," she said quietly, her voice trembling slightly. "I see her. She does it on purpose." I looked at her, surprised. "Are you sure?" She nodded, her expression firm. "Da. Sure. The other side of street is wide open. But every time, she drives close to your curb. She slows down to aim. It is not an accident." Mrs. Petrova's words were like a lightning strike, obliterating my last shred of doubt. This wasn't carelessness. This was an attack. A deliberate act of aggression from a woman with far too much time on her hands and far too much malice in her heart. I didn't know why she was targeting me, but I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to let it continue. The war of the trash can had officially begun. "Mrs. Petrova's words echoed in my ears as I walked back inside my house. She does it on purpose. The fog of ambiguity was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't dealing with a careless driver. I was being targeted by a bully with a 2.5-ton SUV and a baseless hatred for my personal property. My first instinct was hot anger, a desire to storm across the street and confront her then and there. But then I looked inside and saw Sophia doing her homework at the kitchen table, Matteo playing a game on the couch. They needed stability, not a father brawling with the neighbors. I had to handle this smartly, like an adult. So, I decided to try the direct, polite approach first. I waited until later that afternoon, when I saw Carol trimming her perfect azalea bushes with almost surgical precision. I took a deep breath, walked across the street, and put on my most neighborly smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Covington," I started. She turned, her cold blue eyes narrowing slightly at the sight of me. Her smile didn't reach them. "Mr. Martinez. Can I help you with something?" "Actually, yes," I said, keeping my tone light. "I just wanted to ask about the trash can situation. It seems like every Tuesday morning it gets hit by your car. It's the third one in 3 weeks." Carol set down her pruning shears, wiping her hands on a pristine gardening apron. "Oh, that," she said, her voice syrupy sweet, like poisoned honey. "I'm so sorry to hear that. As I've said, these streets are dangerously narrow. Perhaps you should reconsider your placement timing adjustments." "Placement timing adjustments?" I frowned. "The garbage truck comes around 6:30. I have to put it out before then. City ordinance." She let out a dramatic sigh, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. "Look, sweetheart," she said, the condescension in her voice making me grit my teeth. "When you live in a premium community like Oakmont Creek, there are unwritten rules of aesthetics and flow. An unsightly receptacle sitting at the curb for hours disrupts the entire visual flow of the street." "Visual flow?" I repeated, unable to believe what I was hearing. "It's a trash can. It's out there for maybe 20 minutes before the truck arrives, and it keeps getting destroyed. Perhaps if it wasn't there for so long, it wouldn't be so prone to accidents, would it?" she said with a subtle wink. "Just a friendly tip from a neighbor who cares about our property values. Now, if you'll excuse me, these azaleas won't prune themselves." She turned her back on me, a clear dismissal. I stood there for a moment, stunned by her audacity. She had all but admitted to it, blamed me for it, and wrapped it all in a phony veneer of community standards. The conversation confirmed it. Reason wasn't going to work. The next week, I decided to change my tactics. I was no longer a passive victim. I was a documentarian. On Monday night, I didn't put the can out. Instead, I woke up at 5:45 a.m. on Tuesday. I placed my 4th trash can at the curb and immediately set up my phone on a small tripod, hidden behind a shrub in my yard, camera aimed directly at the can. Then I went inside and watched from the living room window. At 6:15 a.m. sharp, the white Lexus rounded the corner. It slowed. There was no pretense of a rush this time. Carol slowly veered from the center of the road, her passenger side tires climbing the grassy curb, and with a deliberate surge of acceleration, she rammed the can, crushing it under her vehicle. She even paused for a second, as if to admire her work, before backing onto the street and driving away. I had it. All of it on video. It was clear as day, irrefutable. My satisfaction lasted only until I went outside to clean up. This time, there was something different. Tucked under a piece of shattered plastic was a note. In Carol's perfect, slanted handwriting it read, "Clean up your trash. This is a nice neighborhood." The sheer gall was breathtaking. Not only did she destroy my property, but she left a condescending reminder. It was a declaration of war. I knew one video might not be enough. It would be my word against that of an established HOA board member. So I went to the electronics store and bought a high-quality Ring doorbell camera. That same afternoon, I installed it, making sure it had a perfect view of my driveway and the curb. I also went to Home Depot and bought not one, but 5 more trash cans. I told the cashier I was working on an art project. He just shrugged, and that's when the game really changed. Carol seemed to sense my shift in strategy. Her harassment became more sophisticated. Instead of just destroying the can, she began a war on a new front, the HOA bylaws. The culmination came on a Friday afternoon, when the mail carrier handed me a certified letter. My stomach tightened. Mail from the government or official bodies is never good news. I opened it to see the letterhead of the Oakmont Creek Estates HOA. It was an official violation notice, but not for my grass or my mailbox. It was for the trash can. Violation of Section 4.7.3. Improper placement of waste receptacle causing traffic obstruction. I read it, and then read it again. It was absurd. My placement was mandated by the city. How could it be in violation of the HOA? The letter demanded that I remedy the situation in 72 hours, or be fined $50 a day. How was I supposed to remedy it? By violating city ordinance and not having my trash collected? It was a calculated move. It was no longer me versus Carol. She had made it me versus the Homeowners Association. She had weaponized the bureaucracy against me. She had laid a trap, believing I would either comply and get fined by the city, or ignore it and get buried in fines by the HOA. That evening, I spread the documents on my kitchen table. On one side, the official violation notice. On the other, the city ordinances I had printed. In the middle, the thick binder of HOA bylaws. The initial hot anger had cooled, replaced by a steely resolve. She had made a critical mistake. She thought I was some easy-to-bully newcomer. But she didn't know that. As an electrician, my entire career was built on reading codes and regulations, finding the contradictions, and using the system itself to solve problems. Carol Covington had started a war. Now, I was going to finish it. The 2 weeks following my conversation with Mrs. Petrova were a masterclass in strategic preparation. I channeled my frustration into methodical action, the same way I'd troubleshoot a complex electrical system. Every Tuesday morning, I'd put out a new trash can, I'd bought a 5-pack for a bulk discount, and at 6:15 a.m. on the dot, my newly installed Ring doorbell camera would capture the pearl white Lexus GX, systematically crushing it. I had a growing collection of videos, each time-stamped and securely saved to the cloud. In parallel, I hit the books. I read the entire 128-page rulebook for the Oakmont Creek Estates HOA, a document so dry it could cure insomnia. More importantly, I downloaded and printed the city ordinances regarding waste collection and public right-of-way. The evidence in my hand was irrefutable. My trash can placement was 100% compliant with the city, and the HOA bylaws had no clause whatsoever about can materials or placement timing, so long as it was removed after collection day. Then, as if on cue, a certified letter from the HOA arrived. Inside, on expensive-feeling cardstock, was an official violation notice. Violation of Section 4.7.3. Improper placement of waste receptacle causing traffic obstruction. The letter, signed by President Richard Sterling's shaky hand but written in Carol's unmistakable prose, demanded I remedy the violation within 72 hours or face a $50 daily fine. That was my cue. I emailed a request to speak at the monthly HOA meeting. My topic listed as clarification on Section 4.7.3 and resident property matters. The Oakmont Creek community room smelled of stale coffee and years of accumulated boredom. A record 12 homeowners showed up, which had President Sterling nervously adjusting his tie every 30 seconds. Carol sat at the board table, wearing a navy blazer that screamed, "I mean business," but I noticed the slight tremor in her hands when she reached for her water glass. She knew what was coming. When Sterling called for old business, I stood up, a thick folder in my hands. "I'd like to address the violation notice regarding trash can placement," I said, my voice calm and clear. The room went silent, save for the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I started by reading the city ordinance aloud, word for word. Then, I displayed a survey map of my lot, showing the placement was perfectly compliant. By law, I concluded, the HOA has no jurisdiction over the public right-of-way. My placement is legal. Then, I moved to my second point. Furthermore, for the past 5 weeks, my personal property has been destroyed 5 times, at the same time, on the same day of the week, by the same vehicle. I presented the color printouts of the crushed cans, Carol's Lexus visible in the background. The total in property damage so far is $125, not to mention the time and labor for cleanup. A murmur went through the room. Carol's face went pale. She tried to interrupt. This is a misunderstanding of the safety protocols. It's no misunderstanding, I cut her off, my tone still professional. It's a systematic pattern of property destruction. And this violation notice, I held up the letter, is a targeted act of harassment and retaliation. Richard Sterling stammered, well, this requires further review. We'll table this matter. Table it? A neighbor from the back piped up. The guy has proof. Why are we paying HOA dues for them to harass people who follow the law? The meeting quickly unraveled for them. Carol was publicly humiliated, and the board looked completely impotent. They had nothing to stand on against cold, hard facts. But Carol wasn't done. As we filed out, she cornered me in the parking lot, under the buzzing yellow security lights. This is where the mask came off completely. You think you're so smart? She hissed, loud enough for the half-dozen homeowners still milling about to hear every word. People like you come into decent neighborhoods and think the rules don't apply to you. Well, I've got news for you. This is just the beginning. The phrase, people like you, hung in the humid Texas air, its racist undertone so obvious that Mrs. Rodriguez from Maple Street audibly gasped. The people nearby suddenly went quiet, pretending to be fascinated by their keys or their phones. But they heard it, and my phone, recording in my shirt pocket, captured every venomous syllable. I was about to get in my truck when a soft voice called out, Mr. Martinez? It was Patricia Lopez, the youngest member of the HOA board. She was a lawyer, always seemed reasonable, and was the only one who looked genuinely disturbed by Carol's behavior during the meeting. I just wanted to say, that was impressive how you handled that, she said, glancing around to make sure Carol was gone. She has been out of line for a long time. Thanks, I said. I just don't get it. Why the obsession over a trash can? Patricia lowered her voice, moving a little closer. It's not just about the trash can, Leo. Can I call you Leo? I nodded. There's something bigger going on. Carol is pushing very, very hard for the board to approve a neighborhood-wide landscaping contract. This was new. A landscaping contract? Yes, she continued, with a company called Emeraldscapes. They are incredibly expensive. It would raise everyone's HOA dues by at least 30%. Carol says it's necessary to protect property values and maintain a premium aesthetic. She has presentations, cost-benefit analyses. She's been pushing this for months. A light went on in my head, connecting the dots. Carol's obsession with the neighborhood's perfect appearance. Her rage at anything that marred the aesthetic, even a trash can for a few hours. She sees anyone who isn't 110% compliant as a threat to her agenda, Patricia said. A misplaced trash can, an imperfect lawn. In her mind, that weakens her argument that we need this expensive overhaul. She needs absolute conformity to justify the massive cost. I stood there in the parking lot, the sound of crickets filling the night. This fight had just become infinitely more complex. It wasn't a petty war over rules. It wasn't just personal animosity. It might be about money, a lot of it. And my little trash can, my symbol of defiance, had somehow become a roadblock in a much larger scheme I was only just beginning to see. Carol's real motive wasn't just power. It smelled an awful lot like greed. The HOA meeting sent ripples through Oakmont Creek. People were whispering. A few neighbors started giving me sympathetic nods, while others, the ones loyal to Carol, gave me icy glares. I'd won a battle, but I was under no illusions that the war was over. Patricia's warning about the expensive landscaping contract had changed everything. Every action Carol took was now viewed through a new lens, the lens of greed. And the retaliation came, not with a bang, but with a series of petty, annoying paper cuts designed to drive me insane. Carol, having lost the public fight, abandoned the direct assault on my trash can. Instead, she weaponized the one thing she knew best, the thick HOA rulebook. She turned it into her personal cudgel, and I was her only target. The first letter arrived the following Wednesday. It wasn't certified, just tucked provocatively in my doorframe. Violation notice. Improper lawn height. Section 6.2.1. It stated that my front lawn was measured at 2.75 inches, exceeding the 2.5-inch maximum. The fine, $25, due in 10 days. The pettiness was astounding. A quarter of an inch? Who on earth had the time to measure their neighbor's grass with that kind of precision? I knew exactly who. I could almost picture Carol, hunched over my lawn at dawn with a ruler. 2 days later, the second letter appeared. Violation notice. Unapproved mailbox color. Section 8.4.2. My mailbox, an approved heritage blue, had apparently faded under the harsh Texas sun to a shade Carol described as unauthorized weathered navy. The fine, $25. Then came the third, the pièce de résistance of absurdity. Violation notice. Window screen degradation. Section 7.5.3. This one alleged that 3 of my windows had minor tears in the bug screens, which compromised the aesthetic integrity of the home's facade. I had to get a magnifying glass to find them. The tears were so small, a gnat would have struggled to get through. The fine, $50. In less than a week, I was facing $100 in fines for infractions so laughably minor they bordered on parody. It was a campaign of harassment, poorly disguised as rule enforcement. Carol knew that fighting each violation individually would be exhausting and time-consuming. She was trying to wear me down, to make me either give up and pay or move out. But she underestimated me. That Friday night, instead of writing checks, I planned a counteroffensive. If she wanted to play by the book, I'd play by the book, but I'd play it better. I spent all of Saturday conducting a full audit of Oakmont Creek Estates. Armed with a tape measure, a digital camera, and a notepad, I walked every street in our neighborhood. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for data. I was looking for a pattern, and I found one. Lawns. I documented 14 other lawns with grass taller than mine, including the lawn of the HOA president, Richard Sterling. His was pushing 3 inches. Others looked like small meadows. Mailboxes. I photographed 18 mailboxes with the same faded blue shade as mine, some far worse, with peeling paint and rust. Screens. Nearly half the homes in the neighborhood had minor tears in their window screens, likely from a hailstorm the previous summer. I documented it all, over 50 time-stamped photos, with addresses and detailed descriptions for each infraction. The evidence was irrefutable. The rules were only being applied to one person, me. On Sunday evening, I drafted a formal email and sent it to the entire HOA board, with the subject line, "Formal complaint regarding selective and discriminatory enforcement." In the email, I was methodical. I listed the 3 violations I had received. Then, I attached my photographic evidence of the same or worse violations at other unfined properties, including the president's. I wrote, "It is clear that the rules are not being applied fairly or consistently across the community. This pattern suggests a deliberate and discriminatory campaign of harassment, executed by a board member, Mrs. Carol Covington, against me personally. This is in direct violation of the board's fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all members. I concluded by demanding that all fines against me be dropped and that a formal investigation be launched into Carol's practices. I also subtly mentioned my audio recording of the verbal confrontation after the last meeting, so they knew I had proof of her animus. I was using their own system against them. Bureaucracies hate being accused of being unfair, especially when there's a paper trail. My complaint forced them into a corner. Either admit they were targeting me, or start fining everyone for every little thing, which would trigger a homeowner revolt. Neither option was good for Carol. While I waited for the board's response, I knew I still had an unresolved problem. The paper war was one thing, but the physical war at the curb was still on. Every Tuesday morning, I still faced the prospect of another destroyed trash can. The constant harassment was getting to me, and worse, it was getting to my kids. Sophia had asked why the mean lady hated us so much. I needed a permanent solution. Something that would end the assault on my trash can once and for all. The idea came the following week, during a chance encounter. I was at the Home Depot Pro Desk picking up some electrical supplies and ran into an old buddy, Dale Kowalski. Dale's a concrete contractor, a tough-as-nails guy with calloused hands that could tell stories of 2 decades of hard labor. When I grumbled about my trash can troubles, a knowing grin spread across his weathered face. "You know, Leo," he said, stirring his coffee with a paint stick. "There's nothing in the city code about what materials you can use for trash containers. Plastic, metal, concrete, as long as it holds garbage and fits the size requirements, you're golden." He said it as a passing comment, but to me, it was a revelation. Concrete. The word echoed in my mind. It was strong, it was permanent, it was immovable. An idea began to form in my mind, a beautiful plan that combined the practical skills of a tradesman with a desire for deliciously malicious compliance. Carol wanted to play a physical game with my property? Fine. I would build a toy her Lexus couldn't break. I would show her what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. Dale Kowalski's words replayed in my head the entire drive home from Home Depot. Plastic, metal, concrete, as long as it holds garbage. It wasn't just an idea, it was an epiphany. For weeks, I had been playing defense, reacting to Carol's attacks. It was time to change the game. I'm a tradesman, a builder. I've spent my life solving problems with my hands and my head, and this was a problem begging for a constructed solution. That Friday, I told the kids we had a special weekend project. "We're going to make the world's toughest trash can," I said with a grin. Mateo, with his budding engineer's mind, was immediately intrigued. Sophia thought her dad was a little nuts, but she was a good sport about it. On Saturday morning, my garage transformed into a fabrication workshop. My second trip to Home Depot was far more purposeful. I loaded my cart with 6 60-pound bags of high-strength concrete mix, a bundle of steel rebar, and a roll of wire mesh. The total cost, $47. Compared to the $350 in fabricated fines and replacement costs, it was a bargain. My plan was simple but effective. I wasn't just going to fill a can with concrete. That would be both wasteful and impractical. Instead, I would use a standard plastic trash can, the last of my 5-packers, and outer shell. It would look identical to every other can in the neighborhood. A perfect Trojan horse. Inside, I built a second mold out of carefully cut and taped cardboard panels, creating a 3-inch gap between the plastic shell and the inner form. This was where the magic would happen. "Dad, what are the metal rods for?" Mateo asked as I cut rebar segments with my bolt cutters. "This is its skeleton, buddy," I explained. "Concrete is strong against being crushed, but it can crack if it's bent. This steel, the rebar, gives it the strength to resist any kind of impact." We spent the morning building the rebar cage inside the can's walls, bending it to the container's shape and wiring it together. The kids thought we were making modern art. In a way, we were. In the afternoon, we mixed the concrete. I put my classic rock station on the radio, and the garage filled with the sounds of Led Zeppelin and the earthy smell of dry cement. I dumped bag after bag into the mixer, adding water carefully until it was the perfect oatmeal-like consistency. The kids helped me pour the concrete slurry into the gap between the molds, tamping it down with a stick to make sure there were no air bubbles. We carefully maintained the drainage holes at the bottom so it would still function as a proper can. By Sunday evening, it was done. We removed the inner cardboard mold, leaving a hollow cavity for the trash. From the outside, it looked unremarkable, but it weighed over 200 pounds, a mini fortress disguised as a humble household object. I nicknamed it the Concrete Citadel. On Monday night, after the kids were asleep, I undertook my mission. I used a heavy-duty dolly to move the monstrosity to the curb, the squeak of the wheels sounding impossibly loud in the quiet neighborhood. I positioned it in the exact spot, the same hallowed ground where its 5 predecessors had fallen. Then I went inside, my heart thumping with anticipation. Tuesday morning, I was up early. I made a strong cup of coffee and took my observation post at the kitchen window, which had a perfect view of the battlefield. The ring camera was on. Everything was in place. At 6:15 a.m., right on schedule, the familiar V8 rumble echoed around the corner. Carol's pearl-white Lexus GX appeared, gleaming under the streetlights. She seemed particularly confident this morning, probably still gloating from her campaign of paper-based harassment. She didn't hesitate. She didn't even slow down. The luxury SUV barreled toward the unsuspecting trash can, ready to perform its weekly ritual of destruction. I held my breath, and then, thud, the sound was all wrong. There was no satisfying crunch of plastic. Instead, there was a deep, solid, sickening thud, followed by the horrible shriek of grinding, tortured metal. Carol's Lexus came to an abrupt halt, as if it had hit a retaining wall. The running board on the passenger side, a feature she probably paid extra for, bent upwards like a piece of tinfoil. Her plastic front bumper spiderwebbed with cracks, and one of the fog lights shattered, tinkling onto the asphalt. My concrete citadel? It barely budged, shifting maybe an inch. It wore a streak of white paint from her vehicle, but otherwise, it stood there, proud and unyielding, looking mildly offended at having been disturbed. Carol sat in her vehicle for a full 30 seconds. I could see her silhouette through the windshield, completely motionless. The confusion and disbelief were palpable even from a distance. What just happened? How could a trash can fight back? Then, her confusion turned to rage. She revved the engine, an angry snarl that tore through the morning quiet. She backed up, turned the wheel slightly, and tried again from a different angle, this time aiming for a corner of the can. Crunch! Screech! The result was even worse for her. The corner of her front bumper was ripped away, exposing the metal components beneath. The headlight on that side was now askew, pointing down at the ground. Her $60,000 vehicle now looked like it had lost a fight in a demolition derby. My concrete citadel gained a few more scratches. This time, she got the message. She didn't try again. With an infuriated squeal of her tires, she reversed, the broken pieces of her own car crunching under her wheels, and sped down the street, leaving silence and the evidence of her failure in her wake. I took a sip of my coffee. It had never tasted so good. The beauty of this solution was its complete and utter legality. I hadn't broken a single city ordinance, hadn't violated a single HOA bylaw. I had simply upgraded my personal property with better materials. If Carol wanted to keep ramming her car into my legal stationary property, that was her choice, and her insurance claim to file. The tables had just turned, and I had a feeling this war was about to get a lot more interesting. The silence the following Tuesday morning was deafening. At 6:15 a.m., there was no V8 rumble, no clang of metal, just the quiet hum of a suburban morning. My concrete citadel stood guard at the curb, unmolested. Victory was sweet, but I knew Carol Covington wasn't one to give up easily. She was simply regrouping and planning a new line of attack. Meanwhile, her Lexus GX had become a rolling billboard for her failure. The cracked front bumper was temporarily held together with duct tape, the running board was warped, and the misaligned headlight gave it a lazy-eyed look. Neighbors were starting to notice. People would slow down as they drove past my house, casting curious glances at the ordinary-looking trash can, then at Carol's mangled SUV. The story was getting around. The Martinez trash can had won a fight with a Lexus, and the Lexus had lost. This public humiliation turned Carol's anger into a full-blown obsession. When she couldn't destroy the can, she became determined to understand it. She transformed from a neighborhood bully into an amateur private investigator, and her sole person of interest was a concrete-filled waste receptacle. The first sign was the surveillance. The dented Lexus now made regular, slow passes by my house at odd hours. Sometimes midday, sometimes at dusk. She'd drive by at a crawl, her eyes narrowed, studying the can as if it held the secrets to the universe. But then it got weirder. One Tuesday night, around midnight, my phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Petrova, her voice an urgent whisper. "Mr. Martinez," she said, "you must look. That woman. She is in your driveway." I crept to my bedroom window and peered out. In the dim glow of the streetlights, a surreal scene was unfolding. Carol, dressed in a dark sweatsuit, was hunched over the concrete citadel. In one hand, she held a flashlight, and in the other, something that looked like a digital luggage scale. She was trying to hook the scale onto the handle, grunting in frustration as the display gave her an error reading. I had to stifle a laugh. This woman was sneaking around in the dead of night trying to weigh my trash can. Her obsession had reached a new, comical level. Her investigation continued to branch out. A few days later, I ran into Jim Torres, our neighborhood maintenance guy, at the hardware store. He was a good guy who'd been with the HOA since before I moved in. "Hey, Leo," he said, scratching his head. "Weirdest thing. Mrs. Covington cornered me in here last week. Kept asking me about who's been buying concrete mix lately. She asked if I knew of any unpermitted construction projects. I told her I had no idea what she was talking about." When her detective work led nowhere, Carol reverted to her favorite tactic, weaponizing bureaucracy. On a Thursday afternoon, I got a knock on the door. It was a tired-looking man in a city-issued polo shirt, holding a clipboard. He introduced himself as Pete, a building inspector. "Sir," he said with the enthusiasm of someone filling out tax forms, "we received a complaint about potential building code violations at this address. Something about an unauthorized concrete structure on residential property." I smiled. "Oh, I think I know what you're here about. Please, come on out." I led Pete to the front, where the concrete citadel sat innocently. Pete walked around it, tapped its side a few times, and looked at me in disbelief. He spent about 30 seconds examining it before shaking his head. "It's a garbage container," he said, his tone making his annoyance clear. "It's not a foundation. No permits required, no violations present. Honestly, I've seen people build entire sheds without this much scrutiny." He made a note on his clipboard and left, muttering about wasted taxpayer money. Thwarted by the city, Carol returned to her home turf, the HOA. The next week, another official letter arrived. This one was even more brazen. It was a formal demand for immediate access to the property for compliance verification. The letter, obviously drafted by Carol and rubber-stamped by Richard Sterling, claimed they needed to inspect my exterior modifications for potential safety violations. This was a major escalation. She didn't just want to know what the can was made of. She wanted the right to come onto my property and go on a fishing expedition for more violations. But I was ready. My nights of studying property law were about to pay off. I'd read about Fourth Amendment protections and the limits of HOA authority. I specifically remembered a landmark case, Narette v. Lakeside Village, where courts ruled that HOAs can't conduct fishing expeditions on private property without specific cause or an emergency. My response to the board was polite but firm. I wrote, "To the Board of Directors, I am denying your request for access to my private property without a court order or a genuine emergency, as is my right under the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. My compliant waste receptacle, legally placed on the public right-of-way, is available for inspection from the public sidewalk at your convenience. Any unauthorized attempt to enter my property will be treated as trespassing." I cited the Narette v. Lakeside Village case and sent it off. Checkmate. She couldn't destroy it, she couldn't get the city to condemn it, and now she couldn't legally get to it. The smell of Carol's frustration was almost as satisfying as fresh concrete. Every morning, she was forced to confront the twin symbols of her impotence, her own increasingly battered Lexus, and my immovable concrete citadel, standing as a silent monument to her stupidity. She was blocked at every turn, and I knew that a person like Carol Covington, when cornered, would do something even more reckless and desperate. The silence from the HOA board following my complaint was almost deafening. They didn't rescind the fines, but they didn't send any new ones either. They were paralyzed by my evidence, caught between having to admit wrongdoing or waging war on the entire neighborhood. Carol, meanwhile, had become a ghost. No more slow cruises past my house. Her dented Lexus seemed to move only when strictly necessary. But this quiet wasn't peaceful. It was the calm before a storm. Her desperation didn't make sense. A normal person, after being repeatedly and publicly thwarted, would back down. But Carol was doubling down. Why? Why would a wealthy, established woman risk such embarrassment, go so far as to sneak around at night to weigh a trash can and file false city complaints? Then I remembered Patricia Lopez's words, echoing in that dark parking lot. She's pushing very, very hard. A company called Emeraldscapes would raise everyone's HOA dues by at least 30%. Until then, I'd seen it as a power play, an attempt to force her expensive aesthetic vision on the rest of us. But now, faced with the sheer irrationality of her behavior, another, darker possibility began to take shape. Patricia was right. It wasn't just about the trash can, and maybe it was about more than just a single landscaping contract. That Sunday night, after the kids were asleep, I turned my dining room into an investigation hub. Fueled by a large coffee, I sat down at my laptop and decided to stop reacting and start digging. I'm an electrician. My job is to follow the wires to find the source. Tonight, I was going to follow the money. I started with the city and county public database, astonishingly powerful tools if you know where to look. I searched for Emeraldscapes, the company Patricia had mentioned. Nothing. No business registration under that name in our county. That was odd. A company big enough to take on a neighborhood-wide contract had no local footprint? Then I tried a different approach. I stopped looking for the company and started looking for the person. I typed Carol Covington into the county business registration portal. A few old hits, but nothing of note. Then, on a whim, I opened a new tab and went to the county property records. I looked up Carol's address. The record showed her as the sole owner, but it also listed her late husband, a minor detail that gave me another surname to search: Sterling. Richard Sterling was the HOA president. A connection? No, just a coincidence of last names. Her husband was David Covington, but the search gave me an idea. Family businesses are often cleverly named. I went back to the business portal and searched for any LLC formed in the last year containing the word Covington, and there it was. A company named Covington Elite Designs, LLC. It was formed 6 months ago. My heart started beating faster. I clicked on the details. The registered agent and primary owner was listed as a man named Frank Miller Carroll's brother-in-law, and listed as a minority partner, holding a 40% stake, was none other than Carol Covington. I leaned back in my chair, a chill running down my spine. The timeline laid itself out in my head. April, Covington Elite Designs, LLC is formed. June, Carol begins her aggressive lobbying for a premium landscaping contract at HOA meetings. August, my kids and I move in. September, the attacks on my trash can begin, shortly after I asked a few innocent questions about the maintenance budget at my first meeting. But I needed more than a coincidence. I logged into the Oakmont Creek Homeowners portal. Most people only use it to pay their dues, but there's a treasure trove of information hidden there if you look: monthly financial reports and meeting minutes. I started downloading the financials for the last 6 months. I scanned past the usual expenses: water for the sprinkler system, electricity for the street lights, and then I saw them. A series of payments made to Covington Elite Designs, LLC. They weren't for huge amounts. That was the genius of it. $1,800 in June for emergency tree trimming, $2,500 in July for mulch replacement, $2,200 in August for sprinkler head repairs. Each payment was just under the $3,000 threshold that, according to the HOA bylaws, would have required multiple bids and a full board vote. Over 4 months, the board by Richard Sterling and prodded by Carol had paid Carol's family business a total of $23,400 of our HOA dues without a single competitive bid. The final blow came when I cross-referenced these payments with the meeting minutes. At every meeting where these minor maintenance expenses were approved, Carol was present, and not once did the minutes record her disclosing her financial interest in the vendor. That was it. Breach of fiduciary duty. A blatant conflict of interest. This wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And then it all made sense. The expensive Emeraldscapes contract she was pushing was probably phase 2, a way to lock in a bigger, fatter contract for her company under a different name. The harassment against me was never about a trash can. It was about control. I was the unknown variable, the newcomer who wasn't in her circle, who had the audacity to question the budget from day one. She needed to crush me into silence or get me to move before I accidentally stumbled onto the cozy little empire of corruption she was building. My concrete citadel became a symbol of defiance she couldn't tolerate because it threatened to expose everything. I sat there in the quiet dining room, the glow of my laptop illuminating a stack of printouts, business registrations, financial statements, meeting minutes. The scale of the deception was staggering. She wasn't just a bully. She was a grifter, embezzling money from the very neighbors she claimed to be superior to. This fight was no longer about $47 for a reinforced trash can. It was about $23,400 that had been stolen and likely much more to come. I now had the ammunition. Not concrete and rebar, but cold, hard facts in black and white. And I knew exactly what I had to do with them. I sat in my dining room until 2 a.m., surrounded by stacks of paper, the irrefutable proof of Carol's systematic theft. The initial feeling of victory had given way to the immense weight of the situation. This was no longer personal. This was a crime against our entire community, and I was holding the evidence. Going after Carol alone would be risky. She would paint me as a disgruntled troublemaker, a newcomer trying to stir the pot. To expose her, I needed allies. I needed the weight of the community. The first person I thought of was Patricia Lopez. As a lawyer, and the only voice of reason on the board, she was the perfect place to start. The next morning, I sent her a brief text. I found something related to our conversation. Can I buy you a coffee outside the neighborhood? It's important. We met at a quiet cafe in the next town over, a neutral space far from the prying eyes of Oakmont Creek. I laid out my folder on the table. I showed her the business registration for Covington Elite Designs, the highlighted financial statements, the meeting minutes. As I spoke, Patricia's expression shifted from curiosity to shock to a slow-burning anger. As a lawyer, she immediately grasped the legal gravity. "My God, Leo," she whispered, scanning an inflated invoice. "This is straight-up fraud. Breach of fiduciary duty, undisclosed conflict of interest. She could face jail time for this. Richard Sterling could be liable for negligence, too." "I know," I said, "but we have to be strategic. If we move too soon, she'll find a way to cover her tracks. We need popular support." "You're right," Patricia agreed, a new determination in her eyes. "She's ruled this place by fear for too long. It's time for it to end. I'll help you from the inside. I'll start asking questions about the bidding process and demand an independent financial audit." Emboldened, I knew my next step. I needed a core team, a small group of trusted neighbors who had either witnessed Carol's behavior firsthand or been affected by it. That evening, my garage, the birthplace of the concrete citadel, was repurposed into a war room. I invited 4 people. Mrs. Petrova arrived first, carrying a thermos of hot jasmine tea, her kind eyes now steely with resolve. Jim Torres, the maintenance guy, came next, looking nervous but determined. Dale Kowalski, my concrete contractor buddy who'd given me the original idea, was there too. Finally, Patricia Lopez arrived, bringing a copy of the HOA bylaws and her legal mind. I had taped my printouts to a large whiteboard, connecting the dots with a red marker like something out of a crime thriller. I laid it all out for them, from the destroyed trash cans to the $23,400 embezzlement scheme. When I finished, the garage was silent. Jim Torres spoke first. "I knew it," he muttered. "She kept having me sign off on invoices from that company. The prices always seemed high for small jobs. One time, they charged $500 to replace 3 sprinkler heads. I could have done that for less than $100. Dale nodded in agreement. $2,000. $500 for mulch? Unless they were using gold-plated bark, that's highway robbery." Mrs. Petrova, in her quiet wisdom, said, "She thinks we are all stupid or too scared to speak. She is wrong. Over the next 2 hours, we hammered out a multi-pronged attack plan. We wouldn't just react. We would seize control of the narrative. First, the legal front. Patricia would discreetly consult with a law firm specializing in HOA litigation. She would also formally demand a full financial audit at the next board meeting, putting Carol and Richard on the defensive. Second, the community front. This was key. We drafted a petition demanding full financial transparency and a special meeting to address concerns of fiscal mismanagement. Mrs. Petrova and a few other trusted neighbors would go door to door, not with anger, but with cold, hard facts. Third, the evidence front. Jim would covertly review the work done by Covington Elite Designs, taking photos and providing professional estimates of what the jobs should have cost. Dale agreed to be our construction consultant, breaking down the invoices to find the inflated charges. Fourth, the media front. We would hold this card in reserve, but we identified an investigative reporter at Channel 7, known for exposing local corruption. We would begin preparing a full press kit. As our meeting was winding down, an unexpected twist landed, showing the depths of Carol's desperation and obsession. My phone rang. It was an old friend, Dave, who works in the city permit office. "Hey, Leo, got a weird one for you," Dave said. "I was just looking at the agenda for the traffic committee meeting next week. There's a petition from a concerned resident group in Oakmont Creek." "A petition for what?" I asked. "They want the city to change the trash can placement ordinance for your street only. They're citing a severe traffic safety risk. They even submitted a 10-page self-made traffic safety study, complete with charts and photos. It looks professional, but it's also completely insane." I almost dropped the phone. While I was uncovering her embezzlement scheme, she was still fighting the original war. She was trying to change the laws of an entire city just to prove she was right about a trash can. The ego was unbelievable. "Dave," I said, "can you send me a copy of that petition?" "Sure thing. But hey, Leo, be careful. Whoever put this together is not playing with a full deck." I hung up and relayed the news to the group. The room was stunned. Patricia shook her head in disbelief. She's creating a paper trail of her own obsession, submitting a false report to a government body. That's potentially another charge. The news only hardened our resolve. Carol wasn't just greedy. She was reckless and dangerous. She was losing control. As everyone left, I stood alone in my garage, looking at the whiteboard covered in arrows and numbers. For the first time since I'd moved in, I didn't feel alone. A community isn't defined by rigid rules or perfect lawns. It's defined by the people willing to stand up for what's right. The coalition was formed. The plan was in motion. And Carol Covington had no idea the storm she had created was about to break right on top of her. Our campaign began quietly, but effectively. Mrs. Petrova, with her grace and credibility, was the perfect person to lead the door-to-door effort. She didn't arrive with anger, but with gentle questions and copies of the financial statements. "I just don't understand why we paid $500 for 3 sprinkler heads," she would say, her voice full of genuine concern. "Our funds are so limited." The seeds of doubt were being sown in the fertile ground of simmering discontent. Meanwhile, at the board meetings, Patricia started asking sharp questions. She requested detailed bidding processes, cost-benefit analyses, and questioned the necessity of emergency contracts. Richard Sterling, accustomed to rubber-stamping Carol's every proposal, began to look flustered and cornered. Carol felt the shift. She may not have known about our financial investigation yet, but she could feel her power base eroding. Whispers would stop when she approached. Neighbors who used to fawn over her now avoided her gaze. Her control was fracturing, and it made her dangerous. Her harassment escalated from petty infractions to outright criminal behavior. The first incident happened on a Saturday night. I was jolted awake by a motion alert from my Ring camera. On my phone's screen, I saw a dark, hooded figure standing next to my concrete citadel. Before I could even get out of bed, the figure took out a can of spray paint and quickly scrawled "Get Out" in bright orange on the concrete surface. Then they fled into the darkness. I reviewed the footage. The vandal had been careful to cover their face, but they made one mistake. At the very end of the clip, as they ran off, the camera caught a glimpse of a car parked 3 houses down. It was a white SUV. And even in the grainy infrared, I could make out the dented, duct-taped front bumper. A few days later, another attack. I went out to get the mail and noticed a strange dark stain on the can, as if someone had poured a chemical on it. It didn't do any real damage to the concrete, but the message was clear: this was hostile. But Carol took it a step too far when she came after my livelihood. Over a 48-hour period, my electrical company's Google Business and Yelp pages were blitzed with a series of 1-star reviews. They were all from anonymous customers, telling fabricated stories of shoddy wiring, exorbitant prices, and unprofessional conduct. It was a vicious, calculated blow, designed to ruin my reputation and impact my ability to provide for my family. The most reckless act, however, the one that crossed every line, was discovered by my son, Mateo. On Thursday afternoon, he was working on his bike in the driveway when he dropped a nut that rolled under my work truck. When he went to retrieve it, he saw something else. "Dad," he called out, his voice tight. "There's something weird stuck under your truck." I knelt and looked. My blood ran cold. Attached to the frame with a magnet was a small black plastic box with a blinking green LED. I knew exactly what it was. A GPS tracker, professional grade, the kind you can buy online for a few $100s, and completely illegal to place on someone's vehicle without their consent. She was tracking me. My movements, my job sites, my private life. The violation was sickening. I carefully photographed it from every angle, documenting the serial number before removing it and placing it in an anti-static bag. Then, I drove straight to the police station. Officer Martinez, a coincidence in surnames, took my report with the weary expression of someone who had seen this type of escalation before. "Mr. Send, Martinez," he said after reviewing my evidence, the vandalism footage, the fake reviews, and the GPS tracker. "This moves beyond a neighborhood dispute. These are potential criminal charges. Stalking, harassment, destruction of property. We're opening an investigation." While the police were getting involved, Carol made another fatal error on another front: insurance. She had filed a $3,200 claim for the damage to her Lexus, but on the form, she lied. She claimed the damage was from a hit and run on a public street, conveniently omitting the fact that she had caused the damage herself by repeatedly ramming my property. A few weeks later, I got a call from a claims investigator at State Farm. When she asked if I had witnessed a hit and run, I responded calmly. "I didn't see a hit and run," I said. "But I do have over 50 video clips of your policyholder intentionally ramming her vehicle into my property. Would you like to see them?" After a stunned silence, the investigator said, "Yes, sir, I would." I sent her the entire video collection. Her response was swift and decisive. She called me back the next day. "Mr. Martinez, we have denied Mrs. Covington's claim. Furthermore, we are referring this case to our fraud division for criminal investigation. This is one of the most clear-cut cases of insurance fraud I have ever seen." And then, the final, unexpected twist came on a Tuesday evening, just 2 days before the next HOA meeting. My phone rang, displaying an unknown number. I answered to the voice of a man, shaky and desperate. "Island, is this Mr. Martinez?" "Yes. Who is this?" "This is Richard Covington," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Carol's husband." I was silent. "Look," he said, the words spilling out. "This has to stop. Carol, she's lost it. She spent thousands on lawyers and surveillance equipment. Our car insurance was canceled. Frank's business is being audited. We're going bankrupt." He took a shaky breath. "I need to know, what will it take to make this go away? I'll pay for the trash cans." The offer was pathetic. It was an unintentional confession, a confirmation of everything we had uncovered. Their empire wasn't just corrupt, it was crumbling. I kept my voice cold and steady. "Mr. Covington," I said, "your wife stalked my family, vandalized my property, committed insurance fraud, and embezzled money from 127 families. This isn't going away with a check." I hung up the phone. The game was over. She was facing multiple criminal investigations, and her finances were in ruins. The HOA meeting on Thursday was no longer going to be a confrontation. It was going to be a public execution. The community center had never been so full. A space designed for 40 was now packed with over 100 residents. People lined the walls, spilling out into the hallway. Someone had brought lawn chairs. The air was thick with anticipation, a mixture of industrial coffee and raw tension. This wasn't a normal HOA meeting, it was a referendum on the future of our neighborhood. At the front, the Channel 7 news crew had set up a camera. The investigative reporter, Sarah Kim, was taking notes, her eyes sharp, catching every nuance. And next to the podium, like a silent, stoic witness, sat the concrete citadel. I'd brought it in on a dolly, the orange get-out spray paint still visible like a badge of honor. Carol and Richard Sterling sat at the board table, looking like they were facing a firing squad. Carol was dressed in funereal black. Her usual smug confidence was gone, replaced by a pale, tight-lipped tension. A lawyer sat beside her, whispering urgent advice into her ear. Richard Sterling was mopping his brow with a sweat-soaked handkerchief. When Richard stammered his way to the resident comments section, I was the first to my feet. I walked to the podium, not with anger, but with the cold calm of a man holding all the cards. "Good evening," I began, my voice carrying easily through the silent room. "My name is Leo Martinez. I'm not here tonight to talk about a trash can. I'm here to talk about harassment, corruption, and the betrayal of our community's trust." For the next 20 minutes, with the help of a projector Patricia had arranged, I laid out the entire story. I played a video compilation of Carol's greatest hits, her Lexus ramming my can over and over, to audible gasps and nervous laughter from the crowd. I put up the photo of the GPS tracker. "This is how our board deals with dissent," I said. "Not with dialogue, but with illegal surveillance." I mentioned the open police investigations for stalking and vandalism. I revealed the insurance fraud investigation, explaining how she had lied to get a payout for damage she had caused herself. And then I delivered the kill shot. "But this personal harassment," I said, my voice low, "was just a smokescreen for a much larger crime." I projected the business registration for Covington Elite Designs onto the screen. I showed the timeline. I displayed the inflated invoices next to the HOA financial statements, showing the $23,400 that had been funneled from our community fund into her family's company. Every month, when you paid your HOA dues, a portion of your money wasn't going to beautify our neighborhood. It was going to enrich Mrs. Covington. The room erupted. Neighbors who had been grumbling about rising fees suddenly understood where their money had been going. Mrs. Rodriguez stood up, shouting in Spanish that was certainly not complimentary. And that's when Carol snapped. "This is harassment!" she shrieked, bolting from her chair, her face crimson with rage. Her voice was shrill, cracking with hysteria. "This is a personal attack. You people don't understand property values or community standards. People like you." She pointed a trembling finger at me. "Come into decent neighborhoods and you ruin everything." The Channel 7 camera captured it all. The undisguised racism, the venomous entitlement, the complete psychological breakdown of a deposed tyrant. In her rage, she lunged towards me, trying to rip down my presentation boards. But before she could get close, the doors to the community center swung open. Officer Martinez walked in, followed by a partner. The room fell instantly silent. He walked with purpose, ignoring the chaos. He stopped in front of the board table. "Carol Covington," he said, his tone official. "You are under arrest on charges of insurance fraud and illegal surveillance." Time seemed to stop. Carol's face went from rage to disbelief to utter soul-crushing horror as the officer produced a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click of the cuffs snapping shut echoed through the silent room like a gunshot. Game over. The aftermath. The collapse was swift and total. The Channel 7 news story was a bombshell, exposing the corruption in the suburban paradise. Facing criminal charges and a civil suit from the HOA, under new leadership, Carol and her husband sold their house at a loss to pay for legal fees and restitution. They were forced to pay back $47,000 to the HOA, the original embezzled amount plus audit costs. They eventually moved away in disgrace. Carol took a plea deal, receiving probation and a hefty fine. The HOA board was completely reformed. Richard Sterling resigned immediately. Patricia Lopez was unanimously elected the new president. Under her leadership, the bylaws were rewritten, mandating financial transparency and competitive bidding for all contracts. The recovered $47,000 was used to fund the one community project everyone wanted, a new, state-of-the-art playground. The day we had the ribbon-cutting ceremony, I watched my kids, Sophia and Mateo, playing alongside the neighborhood children, and I felt a sense of victory deeper than any personal revenge. We had turned her corruption into our children's joy. And the concrete citadel? It became a neighborhood legend. We moved it into the lobby of the community center. Next to it is a small brass plaque that reads, "The Immovable Object. In honor of truth, transparency, and the rights of a homeowner. 2025. For me personally, the war was life-changing. Standing up for my family and my community earned me a new level of respect, not just from my neighbors, but from myself. My business thrived on referrals. And most importantly, my kids learned a priceless lesson no school could ever teach, that sometimes one ordinary person, armed with the truth and a little bit of concrete, can bring down an empire. Sometimes, David really can beat Goliath, especially when Goliath is too busy destroying herself.